my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. I'd like to take a minute to talk about this episode's sponsor, Aeroflow Breast Pumps. Did you know that breast pumps and milk storage bags, maternity compression garments, even lactation education and support can all be covered by your insurance? Aeroflow helps millions of parents unlock these breastfeeding and postpartum essentials by working directly with your insurance company to get these free essentials shipped straight to your door. Aeroflow offers all major pump brands, including Medela, Spectra, Motif, Lancino, Amita, LV, Willow, and more. Visit aeroflowbreastpumps.com/birthhour to fill out their free and easy qualify through insurance form. Don't forget to use the promo code BIRTHHOUR15 in their online shop for 15% off all supplies and accessories. You've got enough on your plate. Why not let Aeroflow Breast Pumps help support you on your breastfeeding journey? At the end of this episode, I talk with Kate not only about getting her breast pump for free through Aeroflow, but also about taking advantage of their online lactation classes. So stay tuned for that conversation. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another way you can get involved with the Birth Hour community is by joining our Patreon. This is where you pledge your support of the Birth Hour at $5 a month or more, and you get perks in return, like access to all of our archived episodes. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes. We've been putting out birth stories since 2015, and those are all available in our archives via Patreon. And you also get access to our private Facebook community, which is a really great group of people who are there to support you, become friends, and just encourage you on this journey through parenthood. So find out more about that at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's birth story guest is Meghan, and she has 2 birth stories to share. Her first was a hospital induction, and then her second was a twin birth, and it was unmedicated at the hospital. All right, let's hear from Meghan. Hi, Meghan. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Bryn. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we've got a couple stories today, but before we get to those, can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. I'm Meghan. I'm married to my husband, Bill, for going on 5 years. We've been together this year for about 10 years. And we live in North Central Florida. I actually was born in the town that we're in and went to pursue undergrad and graduate school at the university here. And now we also work for the teaching hospital in town. We met in graduate school, and he is a physical therapist and I'm a speech language pathologist. So we have probably been for the better part of 7 years working at the hospital and decided that we wanted to start a family. So I'm sharing my birth stories for my daughter Stella and my twin girls, Zoe and Millie, today.
All right. So super rooted in your community, it sounds like.
Yeah. That's an understatement.
You're like, yeah, everyone knows me. I know everyone.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and start with your first pregnancy and anything you want to share there.
Sure. So being that it was a pandemic, we apparently thought that was a really great time to start trying to get pregnant. That was in February 2021. And at the time, we were really just working and social distancing with friends. Zoom was a huge thing at the time. We were getting really into yoga. And at the time in 2021, we had started going back into studio. My husband is a yoga instructor as well as a PT. And I was really diving into that. It was the first time I really enjoyed exercise. And I mentioned that because I was doing yoga 1 to 2 times a day while we were trying to get pregnant. And I think the mental work that you do as part of yoga, in addition to the ways that you challenge your body, really geared me up towards pregnancy and birth. And I think it's important to mention because that really helped me. And it wasn't prenatal yoga, it was intense hot yoga and vinyasa yoga styles. And I fell pregnant in April. And the week that I conceived, in hindsight, we could look back and recognize my husband turned 30, so we had a big blowout at our house for him. My sister got into medical school, and then we found out we were expecting, and that was super exciting. I had pretty early symptoms that women commonly describe, like breast tenderness. I was really having headaches almost as soon as I found out that I was pregnant. And I've been on oral birth control for decades. And so I knew exactly when I was expecting my period, and the day that I was supposed to get my period, I tested and it was positive. So I knew I was pregnant for a very long time. So felt pregnant for a very long time. And those headaches just really were unbearable. And in hindsight, I think perhaps I was a bit dehydrated. So I could have been hydrating and fueling my body a little bit better. But it, like I said, was a pandemic. And at the hospital at the time, our protocol was N95 with all COVID positive patients. But out of an abundance of caution, I was electing to wear my N95 mask and a regular mask. And we also were wearing OR caps, just really protecting every orifice and inch of our skin. And I was, double downing on that and really trying to protect myself. I experienced some SPD symptoms that really felt debilitating in the sense that I couldn't really weight shift without feeling like my whole pelvic floor was going to split open. So my husband has a colleague that is a pelvic floor therapist that was in his graduate school with him. And she was really a godsend for me, gave me some exercises that I wish I could say I was more diligent at doing. But when I started doing the exercises, I really did feel like there was a benefit to them. Being in the medical field, thought that everyone birthed in the hospital. And I had done a lot of research leading up to getting pregnant, where I'd watched The Business of Being Born. I'd stumbled upon the birth hour. And I knew that women could birth in a lot of different ways than I initially thought. I just always thought that you birthed in a hospital. But I wanted to pursue a home birth, but was kind of met with a little bit of resistance from skeptical family members initially, and also insurance didn't really offer coverage for home birth with the midwifery co-op we were initially kind of looking into. So I elected to make an appointment with our teaching hospital that we also work for. And I was just so excited for someone to confirm the pregnancy officially, which, as many women know, you have to wait upwards of 12 to 13 weeks to meet any provider before they'll confirm that you are as pregnant as you feel. So I met with a PA who was she was my first ally in the medical world in terms of birth. She was a mom of 4 and had 2 home births and 2 hospital births. So I kind of felt like that was the universe winking at me saying, you can have either. And she encouraged me to look into midwifery care because I was still early on in my pregnancy and I was otherwise pretty low risk, even though it was my first pregnancy. So I, kept getting little winks from the universe saying, home birth, home birth, home birth. And that was one of them. I ended up scheduling with an OB, and I also felt like I would meet with an OB just to kind of hear their opinion of how they would kind of facilitate my pregnancy and birth. And I really just wanted to explore all options that were available to me. And in our community, we have a wonderful hospital and we also have wonderful midwifery care. So I felt like it would be a disservice to myself if I didn't kind of keep everything open. But when that appointment happened, it was kind of leading into the few weeks that my anatomy scan fell. And she just, for lack of a better word, gave me the ick and didn't really encourage me the way that I thought I should be encouraged while pregnant. And to each his own, she gave me her opinions on how pregnant women should be held during pregnancy. And it was quite medicalized. And to her credit, she's a wonderful OB and has seen a lot, but had never seen home birth. And so I really wanted to seek out midwives who were really experienced in home birth, and that's all they knew as well. So I was kind of exploring both ends of the spectrum, but that kind of gave me the peace of mind, coupled with talking with my therapist one day, and she gave me insights on how to request insurance coverage through my midwife cooperative. And that's kind of where what led me to seeking care and transitioning my care to the midwives around 24 to 26 weeks. And I'm so grateful for that because those appointments were just so sweet. I felt very cared for. I felt like I had a lot of autonomy in those appointments where I would take my weight, I would take my urine sample. And I think a lot of women who seek that care through those providers can attest that a lot of it is on you. And that is really a special thing because you're the person giving birth and you're the person pregnant. And to feel that others trust you to care for a life is very empowering because pregnancy is such a vulnerable time and you really seek a lot of affirmation. Am I doing this right? Am I making the right decision? And I never felt like I was making the wrong decision with the midwives that I was being cared for by. I will kind of skip ahead to my pregnancy was overall pretty easy, aside from some of those symptoms I had mentioned. Moving into the last 4-ish weeks of my pregnancy, I kind of got hit with a few different things. One being my grandmother, who I was really, really close to, passed away. It was expected, but the timing of it was a little unexpected. And I remember just taking a few days off of work and just crying and really mourning the fact that this person that I held in such high regard would never get to meet her great-granddaughter. And so that was really hard for me. Yeah. I'm such a crier, so I knew that I would cry. But,
very normal.
Yeah. But that was really hard. And so moving through that time was difficult. And then I think because I had been crying so much, I fell sick and my body was it was kind of done being really strong for holding this life form and also carrying me. And I developed bronchitis and just was miserable for the better part of 2-3 weeks moving into my 39th week. But I felt kind of on the up and up and my spirits were lifted a little bit because I was excited that I was moving into almost the 40th week of pregnancy. Around that time, I was still working. I was working 8-hour days, 5 days a week and doing okay with it overall. I in hindsight, wish I had maybe given myself a little bit of time, but the maternity leave that our hospital affords us is quite short in the grand scheme of things. And if we compare it with other countries in the world, but I wanted to make sure that I could soak in all the postpartum time with my daughter that I could. So I worked literally until I went into the hospital for an NST and biophysical profile because I told my midwives I was feeling decreased fetal movement, but not so much decreased movement count, but the intensity had changed. And I thought that maybe that was expected because I was, at max capacity. The baby didn't have much more room to grow. And I'm 5'1" in stature, so I'm quite little. And I just kind of assumed maybe this is normal, but my midwives agreed that it would probably be in my best interest at 39 and 4 to go in for an early NST and BPP. And that's really where I felt anxious in my pregnancy for the first time. Going into the hospital, I knew the hospital well. I've been on every single floor except the L&D triage. And I probably could have done a little tour on a work day, but I didn't, just thinking that I'd only have to go in for those 40 plus weeks NSTs and BPPs. But all that to say, my husband and I left our work day after clearing it with our bosses at our lunch break and walked over to triage to be seen. I think that it's protocol in most facilities. If you report decreased fetal movement, they have to see you in a pretty timely manner. So they put me in a room pretty quickly, and the nurses set up the TOCO monitor, and the NST ended up being normal. I remember making a comment to Bill, my husband, that I was so glad to not birth in the hospital. It was so clinical and sterile, and I just wanted to be in the comfort of my own home, maybe in the bathtub that we had ordered. We did all the things preparing for home birth that I didn't mention that, but our home was a sanctuary. It was a little after Christmas, so we still had our cozy Christmas decor up, and I was really ready for my twinkling lights and my meditative playlists on at home. So I kind of dismissed the thought and thought, well, I'll be going soon. Everything's going to be fine. And it was, but on the biophysical profile, a young resident came in and told me that she needed to check me, essentially. That was kind of protocol. They explained it was kind of protocol to check and then also do the biophysical. She kind of gave me a squeamish look like, oh, you're only fingertip and you're not effaced at all. And I kind of assumed that because I had no signs of labor and I was just feeling this less intense movement. And when she was ultrasounding, she had kind of mentioned that my amniotic fluid looked low. And after she had completed the ultrasound, she told me that I was going to be diagnosed with a condition called oligohydramnios, which is low amniotic fluid that can really pose a risk for placental demise. I'm sorry if I used the term incorrectly. And a lot of other complications associated with potential stillbirth as well. And so she was very quick to tell me everything that could go wrong as a result of oligo, and rightly so. But that really kind of raised red alarms in my head. And as a healthcare professional, I know you always should pursue a second opinion. So I asked for someone else to ultrasound and confirm the diagnosis. Ultimately, I knew that I would probably be staying, and I was really anxious about that. And I called my midwives for some counsel, and they said, this isn't what you planned, but you're going to be held here and they're going to take good care of you. And we will be here on call for you over the phone. At the time, we only got 2 visitors in the hospital and I had a few midwives. So they were going to be at my disposal via phone. And we all kind of agreed collectively that induction was probably going to be the only option that was safest to bring her earthside. I remember going into the bathroom and just having all of my nerves fall out of my body. And I was really sad. And I kind of gave myself an opportunity to mourn this beautiful moment in time where I was going to birth at home. And I had to mourn the loss of that idea, knowing that she was still going to get here and it was just going to look very different. And so thankfully, I had the support of my family and friends who could take care of our dog, Leia, at the time. She was going to be a big sister, and I needed a little peace of mind that the house was going to be taken care of because I didn't really plan for any of that, thinking that my dog was going to be right next to the birth tub when I pushed out my daughter. But there was a lot of urgency surrounding induction, and the doctors were kind of pushy about, we need to keep you here or we'll have you sign AMA paperwork. And we ultimately decided that wouldn't be necessary. I would come back. They didn't have to keep me. They could trust me that I would come back for the induction. And the nursing staff was wonderful and kind of encouraged me to go home, eat a good meal, take a shower, wash my hair. I kind of wish they would have also mentioned to call back in the morning, since there was still really good fetal movement that I was feeling. It was still just kind of less intense, like I'd mentioned. We would have really appreciated a full night's sleep. But being that it was my first pregnancy, we just kind of didn't know what to expect in that regard. So we called every hour on the hour, and they ultimately told us at 11 p.m. that we could come into the hospital. So the hospital was kind of what I expected, being that I worked there, but also very, like I said, clinical. And they were nice enough to put me in a room with a birth tub, which I was really excited about, the prospect of potentially being able to birth in the water, which was what I wanted ultimately. The midwives that I was working with called the hospital ahead of time and asked that any nurses be paired with me that were either part of the cooperative at one point in time, so they really knew those nurses well, those nurse midwives well, or utilize the up and coming midwife inpatient program that wasn't fully developed yet, but they had midwives on staff. And so I was kind of hybridized care-wise with midwives and OBs and residents taking care of me, but I really asked for the midwives to be at the forefront, and the nursing staff was really wonderful because of their experience with midwifery care and that model, which was really important to me. So I will kind of keep the 2.5 days that I was in the hospital for this long induction somewhat brief, but all that to say, I think every intervention you could imagine. I had initially the Novi portable monitor placed on my belly. I wanted to be mobile and be able to move around a little bit. I also agreed to starting buccal misoprostol to kind of ripen my cervix that was not thinned at all or dilated. And that morning I was checked and they kind of offered Pitocin as an option, and I agreed to start that as well. So we started Pitocin for that next day, which was January 20th, a Thursday. And I was just kind of in just this little labor bubble where I wasn't really feeling contractions. My husband and I were doing yoga in the room. I was eating my snacks that I had snuck in and was really excited to eat at my home birth, but was eating in the hospital. I was trying to stay hydrated. I wasn't doing a good job of resting. In hindsight, I should have done a little bit better of a job at that. But the team on and off would kind of rush in, multiple providers saying, the baby is looking a little stressed with us taking up the Pitocin. You know, we don't like to see the baby getting a little stressed. And it always felt like a threat of cesarean in not so many words. And I tried to keep in a positive headspace. But as the day went on, we ultimately elected to have a Foley balloon placed, which would help kind of progress me dilation-wise, because my cervix still was real stubborn. She was not ready to come out. And the Foley balloon was easily, when I'm reflecting on all 3 of my births, was easily the most pain I've ever experienced in the context of childbirth. I did not like the pressure sensations of that being placed. I had a vasovagal response where I kind of got lightheaded, dizzy, sweaty, and thankfully it was there for only a few hours, but that was not the intervention that I had planned for or enjoyed at all. The next morning, early in the morning, I kind of thought, I know where this is going, and I think I should just kind of maybe accept the inevitable that I think that we're on the path to cesarean. I'm a first-time mom. My body is not ready to give birth, but baby needs to be here if we want to have her safely earthside. And that was my logical brain talking, but my emotional brain was still crying inside and mourning the fact that none of this is what I wanted. And maybe around 4 or 5 a.m., I told my night shift nurse that I was ready for an epidural to just get some rest because we really hadn't slept. We were just kind of going through the motions of waiting for baby, but we had the epidural placed and I really enjoyed the cool tingliness of it. And I had a great resident that was someone who kind of lessened my nerves as he was placing it. And in the morning, there was a lot more urgency. They had started to increase the Pitocin because I wasn't feeling anything with the placement of the epidural. And so that morning, kind of early afternoon, we elected to break my water and also place an intrauterine catheter to monitor my contractions a little bit more steadily and reliably. We had kind of given up on the portable monitor. They just didn't like the fact that I was moving so much and that it kept kind of ruining the fetal tracing. So we had the Toco in place and my movements still were kind of messing the tracing up for them and they weren't too happy about that. So the intrauterine catheter was a bit more reliable and I was a little bummed that I had not a lot of mobility, but for the better part of that afternoon, the midwives were really great about coming in and repositioning me. They offered me a lot of options that they had, including the peanut ball and a device called, I say a device, but it's looks like an inflatable chair from the 90s. It's called the Cub. And I really liked the feeling of being on my knees with the peanut ball under my butt and kind of in between my calves, and then me laying my chest and arms on the Cub, almost as if I were on all fours, but not quite. And my sister and husband were giving me back pressure. I didn't mention my sister was able to come to the hospital and be there for my labor and birth because my midwives were now on call. So that was really special. Second to my grandma, my mom, she's the most important woman in my life. And so that was super special for her to be there. And at the time, she was recently moved out of our house. It was Three's Company for a few years during the pandemic with my husband, my sister, and I. So it was really special for all of us to experience that together. But afternoon turned into night. I was getting repositioned by the midwives. They did, I think it's called reverse flying cowgirl maybe, and shake the apple trees, all of that to kind of help baby come down. And the epidural was going on strong. I really couldn't feel my lower body, which was a really weird sensation. My feet just felt like they were swelling by the moment with all the IV fluids they were pushing, with being that I was still getting Pitocin. And there was a moment in the early evening before shift change where I just had a moment of prayer and asked to surrender to whatever the plan was that I wasn't aware of, but I knew was going to be in my best interest and baby's best interest. And it was a really emotional prayer. And it was a moment that I kind of turned in. And I wonder if that was kind of, in a way, my body knowing that something was shifting. But hindsight is 20/20. But that prayer was really integral for me to just kind of accept what felt like the inevitable, which was going to have a C-section, which was, again, a complete 180 from my original plan. And I was sad about it, but I knew that I wanted our baby here. And so I kind of made peace with it. I asked for someone to check me before shift change so that I could have extra confirmation. And the resident who saw me in triage came to check me again and kind of had a sour face again and said, not much progress at all. You're still at a 5 and not fully thinned, and baby's still at a -2 or -3 station, I think. And so I was discouraged, but also it gave me a little bit of peace of mind to kind of move forward and ask to be consented for a C-section, et cetera. So I felt kind of forgotten when shift change came and went, and I had met my 2 night shift nurses, and the night attending hadn't come in to chat with me. I think, I delivered Stella at 9:55, maybe around 9:15. I finally told my nurse, hey, I feel like I need to get out of bed and go poop before I, go for this C-section that the attending hasn't yet talked to me about. So do you mind if I take care of that? I really feel like I need to poop. And she knew better. And the attending came into the room quickly. And she said, when was the last time you got checked? As her hand is checking my cervix, she's like, when was the last time you got checked? I feel the baby's head right here. You're at a 9, or you're complete. And you're going to have this baby right here.
Wow.
And I just burst into tears. I was just so overjoyed and surprised. It was just, wow, the duality of that moment where I was grieving, but I was so joy-filled. And I thought, what the heck is going on? I can't believe this is happening. And she, said it with a bit of urgency. And she said that the baby's head was kind of, I think I had a cervical lip, and I also had, the baby's head was a little bit malpositioned from where they had inserted the Foley balloon the night prior, and the catheter was kind of impeding her movement downward. So they were kind of, she was kind of trying to shift that. And at this point, I could feel all of those pressure sensations because my epidural had really worn off, which explains why I could feel the urge to poop pretty profoundly. And, at that point, many, many people entered the room, and I think I turned inward and went into labor land like they all describe. And I really focused on my breath. And it was the most insane experience to go from practicing hot yoga and almost taking a whole hot yoga class with my eyes closed and just really focusing on my breath. That had prepared me so well for this because I was closing my eyes. I heard all the chaos around me, but I really just heard my breath. I remember also they wanted to place an oxygen mask on my face, and know-it-all me asked for the evidence behind it in the chaos that was going on. And there was a blip that said, well, there's not much, but this is just, protective. Why don't you just do it anyway? And instead of putting it on my face, I put it on my ear so I could hear the whooshing of the oxygen to kind of help me tune out as well. I pushed for about 10 minutes. But during those pushes, I kept hearing them say, baby's not tolerating this. We need to assist with a vacuum. And I consented to that because pushing felt like such a relief. I'd get at this really nice break, and then I would have this intense contraction and push, and I could feel her moving down, which was really reassuring. But, and, you know, a little disheartening because I felt her moving downwards and I felt her coming out, and I could feel her crowning. I didn't actually feel the ring of fire for Stella, but I could feel her in that place. And they applied the vacuum, which I was really in labor land at that point, and I didn't feel them place that, but I did 2 additional pushes and she was out. I kind of expected them to put her on my chest right away, but they didn't. And they cut the cord with urgency, knowing that I wanted delayed cord clamping, but they did allow my husband to cut it. They brought her over. My sister walked over with the baby at her bedside bassinet, where the NICU team was there and the pediatric team was there. They had to revive her a little bit, put a little bit of oxygen on. I believe they had to suction her for about a minute. Her initial APGAR was 1. So looking back, that's kind of scary to hear such a low APGAR. Her 5-minute APGAR was 7. So still kind of low, but she pinked up, and maybe about a minute and a half, that felt like 10 minutes went by, and they were able to put her on my chest. And I remember saying, "You did it." And it was so surreal because I didn't really feel bonded to her when she was in my belly. I just knew that there was something in there and I was going to meet her. And when I met her, I felt like I would know her a little bit better, but it was not that experience. I felt like, oh, okay, I made you, my husband and I made you, and you're here, but I still don't know you, and I'm holding you, and I know I have to take care of you. But there was just a slight disconnect. But I also was overwhelmed with what had just happened. It was, again, a 180 from what I expected. And so that was kind of a whirlwind, but ultimately she was on my chest. My sister tells me that I immediately took my boobs out of my nursing bra because I was so excited to breastfeed. I had really prepared for that, and I wanted it so badly, and I knew about golden hour, and I knew about the breast crawl, and I was excited for that. And the chaos had kind of subsided. I saw everyone kind of shift out of my room, and it was just my sister, my husband, and our nurse. And luckily, she just needed that little revival from the team. And then there was nothing else. She didn't need any NICU time. She was with us for that golden hour. Breastfeeding went well. I forced it upon her. She wasn't that eager to feed at first. In hindsight, probably could have just given her a little more time. But then when she started rooting, it was a really cool moment. We were able to FaceTime our parents and share the name. We hadn't shared her name with anyone except my sister. So that was a really fun moment to share. Her name is Stella Greer. And we were then kind of pushed out of our L&D room to make way for another birthing person and went up to recovery or mother-baby unit. And that's kind of when postpartum started. We were very sleep deprived. Probably had 5 hours over the course of 3 days of a long induced labor. And I just didn't have a concept for when to wake the baby. That first time mom fog was really hitting, and my husband and I were still in this state of shock that all of that had transpired the way it did. And this was our baby that we got to take home. All that to say, I continued to kind of wake her and breastfeed her in the hospital. She was making great wet diapers. She failed her hearing screen, which ended up being kind of a fluke, and she passed it a few weeks later with no complications in that regard. But we really pushed to go home. Our house is about 10 minutes away from the hospital, so we really pushed to go home so that we could be with our dog and kind of get our life going. And I'm glad that we did it, but also I wish that we had maybe tried to get another good night's sleep and asked for and been open to receiving a little bit more help in the hospital in terms of, getting some sleep. But I just was really eager to get home, and sleep was going to be something that we didn't get for months and months. So it was kind of out the window at that point. But we got home, and postpartum was nothing like I had planned for or expected. Breastfeeding was working. She didn't have any oral ties that would make things challenging, so I was really grateful for that, but I really struggled emotionally. Every time she'd latch, I don't think I had the term is escaping me, when baby latches and you're just filled with a host of different emotions. Can you remind me of the term?
Oh, yeah. There's like an acronym for it of you just have like a bad reaction to the milk letdown, I think.
Like an aversion to letdown.
Yeah, I'll have to look up the acronym and we'll put it on the show notes.
Okay, sounds good. I don't think that I was having that aversion, but I was just so emotional. I remember having Bill wake up from his precious sleep to just sit by my side and hold my hand as I cried while she breastfed. And that felt like that went on for 3 to 4 weeks. And I felt like I could never hand her off because she wanted to be in my arms and no one else's. And there was a lot of mothering the mother that needed to happen, but I didn't let happen because I thought, now I'm the mom and I have to be perfect at this. I struggled with perfectionism growing up, and that really reared its ugly head postpartum. And I've done a lot of work towards not being a perfectionist in my second and third births. So I feel proud of that. And I think it's important to mention because gosh, first-time moms, what heroes on earth. And we should give ourselves a lot more grace than we do. But I struggled with a lot of postpartum anxiety, and the rage that overcame me when I was triggered by sleep struggles was really, really tough on me, coupled with the fact that I thought that I had to do it by myself. And my family was so wonderful. My parents are also local, so they were always offering to come over and help and hold the baby. And I deferred the help a lot more than I would have liked to. I received and accepted a lot more help this last time. But I feel like it's important to mention because it's very normal. And I just was not in a great headspace. And I thought it would be rainbows and butterflies postpartum, but it was a lot harder than I anticipated. Like I said, I didn't really feel bonded to Stella the way that everyone made it seem like I should, maybe until about 6 months. And so I want to normalize that as well. And anyone that knows me knows I'm obsessed with my daughter, and we are so close. And I can't imagine, I look back and think, gosh, I definitely felt that way. My journal told me I felt that way, but it's hard to kind of reimagine those feelings that I was having at that time. I had to go back to work at around 12 weeks postpartum, which was super hard. And I had a lot of challenges with pumping. I also didn't seek out the counsel of a lactation consultant or an IBCLC like I should have or would have liked to in hindsight, but I think my flanges weren't fit to me. And so I struggled a lot with clogged ducts, which interrupted my workday. And I, really struggled through my workday, which I was held to the same standard as everyone else, but was pumping 3 to 4 times a day and still seeing the same number of patients a day. And so that was super challenging. And women who return to work in healthcare are also heroines on earth. I have a lot of colleagues that are physicians and surgeons at that. And I just have so much respect for those women who just make it work in a system that really doesn't serve us the way that it could. But all that to say, I was using portable pumps as well. So I think that was something that contributed to my struggles with pumping specifically. And I always felt anxious about making the right amount of milk for her, even though she was always fed at the end of the day. I was really lucky in this postpartum season. A lot of my close girlfriends were having babies too. So all of our kids are within 6 months of each other. And we were going through first-time motherhood together. And we had a group text that was just wonderful in that, we could non-judgmentally just vent and say, this is so hard, even though it's joy-filled, it's so hard. Oh my God, are you sleeping? All of that was so, I don't know what I would have done without them in that postpartum season as well. I ended up breastfeeding for 13 months, and I'm really proud to say that. And we kind of organically self-weaned at around that time. And the last day I pumped was the best day of the year. I was really excited to get rid of the pump. So exclusive pumping moms, bow down to you, because I don't know that I could have pursued breastfeeding if I was only able to exclusively pump. I was thankful to have a really special journey breastfeeding, and it didn't start out great and ended up being one of the legacies I have. And I just am so glad that we had that time together. And it really kind of framed how I wanted my next pregnancy and my next postpartum season to look, particularly with regard to breastfeeding. So that kind of leads me into my second birth story.
Hey, yeah. And then I'm guessing a wrench was thrown in those plans a little bit with twins. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into that story.
Yeah. So I, again, was on oral contraceptives. So I was tracking my pregnancy, or I was tracking my period. I just knew when I was going to get my period. And we decided in kind of the fall of 2023 to start trying again. I was kind of trying to think back on what our rationale was, but I think we were just like, let's do it again, and didn't plan as well as maybe we could have. But sometimes you just go for it and hope for the best. And that's definitely what we did. But the week that I was supposed to get my period, I felt feverish, really nauseated, and just off. I remember my mom, my daughter, and I were going somewhere, and I had her pull over and I had to vomit, and I felt like immensely nauseated. And I said, wow, I hope I'm not pregnant. Not that I don't hope I'm pregnant, but gosh, that would be really quick. And I knew, I would be so grateful, but it was really unexpectedly quick. I think it was probably 2 or so months where we started trying, and then we fell pregnant, which I was very lucky to say. We took a digital test. All three of us were in bed. My daughter, my husband, and I, all three of us were in bed. And I kind of thought, this isn't going to confirm what I'm feeling. I really thought it was going to say no. And it was the digital. So it said pregnant, sure enough. And I thought, wow, I should probably just take the line tests too, just to see how quickly the lines develop. And then it'll tell me how pregnant I am. But again, was really out the gate, car sick feeling and ravenous. I was so hungry. And in hindsight, I've listened to so many twin birth stories through the Patreon group on Spotify. I've listened to all of the twin birth stories. And I think every single mother says, I was so hungry. It was so uncharacteristic for me, but I was ravenous. And I absolutely was. I had to wake up in the middle of the night to eat a meal almost. I kept saltines by my bed and Gatorade by my bed just to kind of fuel that hunger. I could never be satisfied for the better part of 2 months. I went into week 9-ish. At this point, I was, still feeling those symptoms, but not as much. I was really excited because I had made an appointment with my midwives. I thought, I am so excited. I'm going to get my Redemptive home birth this time around. And I mentioned it's December 11th. This day is marked in my history because on our way to work, I say, Bill, I really think that I would be okay having 3 kids. This will be our second. And, I think 3 feels like a good number. And on my lunch break, I was scrolling through Instagram and I scrolled past Dr. Victoria Flores's Instagram where she's a home birth OB. And she had posted a story about this beautiful twin home birth, which I find extremely ironic that was what I stumbled across. And I ended up reposting it on my story. And an hour or so later, a colleague of mine, she works in the ICU with me, who was also pregnant. We were really early in our pregnancies and kind of the only ones who knew that each were pregnant. She said, I took the ultrasound machine. Why don't you come and we'll look at our babies? And so we look at hers first, and she puts the ultrasound probe on my belly, and we see these 2 little marbles in there. And we kind of look at each other thinking, no, surely that's, the yolk sac and that's the fetus, right? This is really early. We don't know what we're looking at. She's a neurologist, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm not an OB, and neither of us are. And so she knows well enough how to use the ultrasound and Dopplers, both of them, and beautiful fetal heart tones come across the screen, and her eyes widen, and she immediately says, well, I think you should get a second opinion from someone who takes care of babies.
Oh my gosh, that is the funniest way to find out you have twins.
That is how we found out we were having twins, me and my friend Shweta. And my husband didn't know, and I was in a bit of denial, thinking, there's no way this is happening. I truly did not process it. But maybe after we left the room, I had this sinking feeling, oh my gosh, I can't believe that 5'1", 120-pound me is going to have 2 babies inside of me. And I went to the bathroom and I threw up and I cried and I called my sister. And my sister just was so affirming. She's like, this is a miracle. Like, this is wonderful. Why are you upset? And it was just me having to go through the emotions of, wow, there goes my home birth, right? A lot of selfish thoughts at first. There goes my home birth, even though I have this blessing of twins. And ultimately, I had my husband pick me up, and I didn't say anything the whole car ride. And he didn't seem to want to disturb me. I was looking really off, and we got home. I go back to the bedroom. He's kind of wrangling my daughter out of the car and situates her and comes back and says, "Are you okay?" And I essentially told him that we looked at my friend's baby on ultrasound on our lunch break, and then we looked at our baby, and then we looked at our other baby, and he turned white. And we processed the fact that we were probably having twins for about a week. We ended up going to standalone ultrasound clinic where she said, yep, sure enough, I've seen twins in utero before you are having twins. I called my midwife co-op and said, I'm so sorry, guys, but we're not going to be able to work together, I don't think. And they confirmed that. I know there's not a lot of midwives who are legally able to facilitate twin home birth in certain states, and Florida is one of those, unless you're a certified nurse midwife. Kind of getting ahead of myself here, but we ended up consulting with a home birth nurse midwife in South Florida and just kind of getting an idea of what the logistics of that would look like. And we would end up having to be away from everything that we were comfortable with in terms of friends, family support. We'd have to get an Airbnb, so I wouldn't be in my cozy space for home birth. And it ended up being that it just wasn't going to logistically work out. And so I did a lot of work with my therapist and my husband to just kind of accept the fact that I was going to be in the hospital for this birth, and that's how it was going to be. And I was going to make it great. And I was going to get into a really positive headspace. We, again, had to wait 12, 13 or so weeks to get a confirmatory ultrasound. And that was a day filled with appointments. I think I went into work that day and I called my boss and I said, I am so sorry. I don't think I'll be able to come back to work. These appointments are taking so long. They didn't listen to me over the phone when I said I'm expecting twins. They didn't understand how I knew that I was having twins already. And so the scheduling for the appointment was a little errored in the sense that they scheduled it for a singleton visit, and then they had to kind of go back and make corrections to accommodate us and set us up with maternal fetal medicine specialists as well as the OBs that were on site that day. We played a nice joke on the sonographer who brought her med student in to do the confirmatory ultrasound, and she had no idea it was twins. She was under the impression it was a singleton, just kind of talking through things. And I look at my husband and I'm like, we shouldn't tell her. Let's just see what she does. And she is scanning over and I see her go over baby A and then baby B, and her eyes get really wide. And she looks at me and I just smile and I say, what? Is everything okay? And she said, what's going on? And I said, is there 2 in there or something? I don't remember directly what I said. But she's like, oh my gosh, thank God. I didn't know what to tell you. It's not often that I tell people they're having twins, but I just found triplets in another mother earlier today. So this is just a wild day.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really funny. And the med student, it was, I think, her first time just kind of happening upon twins, not really planning to see that. So my pregnancy was really wonderful. I think because I kind of knew what to expect, I just kind of let those expected symptoms kind of run through me. I was taking magnesium this time, which I really wish that I had been the first time around. And I just felt like that kind of took a lot of the aches and pains away. I was doing a lot of the exercises my friend had given me from my first pregnancy to kind of combat the SPD, which oddly wasn't as bad this time. I was having some intense round ligament pain here and there. At one point in the pregnancy, probably 25-ish weeks, I thought I had appendicitis because the round ligament pain was pulling so much on that side. And I had a good cry thinking I was going to have surgery pregnant with twins. And it ended up just being round ligament pain. And I needed to just drink more water and offset the cramping. But the weirdest thing about my twin pregnancy, I I didn't mention we had our anatomy scan. Everything looked great. They were dichorionic, diamniotic twins, even though I, was doctor Googling everything and I thought, oh, these are for certain monozygotic. Like they're definitely identical. They're so close. Their septum was so thin that I was convinced that they were going to be monodi twins, which a girlfriend of mine had also just found out she was having monodi twins. And we were sharing in that, and that was really sweet. But we were certain that it was monodi. But all that to say, we were having what the doctors called the lowest risk twin pregnancy, which was a blessing. I think I was about to talk about the weird thing that happened in pregnancy. My wisdom teeth erupted. They had been dormant my whole life and they were fully embedded in my gums, and they fully came through during this pregnancy to the point where I couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't chew or talk. And so I had to go get oral surgery with a local anesthetic at about 26 weeks pregnant, which ended up being okay. I was really ramping it up in my mind to be terrible, but the oral surgeon was great. Everyone was very catering to me, and it's a really funny story to tell. I lost 2 teeth and grew 2 babies.
Yeah.
And then I had to be admitted for observation. I really was more intuitive and trusted gut feelings that I had this time around, having my first experience. And around 28 weeks, I was feeling just different movement. It ended up that baby A and B had both turned cephalic, head down, and that was the explanation for those changes in movement. But I had vagaled when they were trying to set up the toco and take all of my vitals in triage. And I kind of grew lightheaded again. They immediately placed an IV to give me some fluids and placed an ice pack on my chest. The nursing staff was great to kind of help me through that. But I had a vasovagal response, and there was a deceleration on the NST that they didn't want to overlook. And so they kept me overnight for observation, which any pregnant woman who has to be in a hospital bed for more than a night, I bow down to her because I was miserable. I had 2 tocos on. I had, everything that you have for a singleton doubled over, and ended up that I'm just very grateful to say that everything looked great on the tracing overnight. And I asked if I could walk to my appointment for my growth scan and OB visit the next day, which was maybe 3/4 of a mile away. And they just looked at me like I was crazy. I said, do you mind if I just get breakfast first? And then I'm going to go walk over to my appointments. I'm, again, so grateful that everything was good, because I was very anxious about even acknowledging those feelings again, with the fear that I was going to be induced and have this medicalized birth. And with twins, everything is much more risk averse. And, I was just grateful overall. I had prior to that been doing like the flashlight trick, spinning babies to really like get these girls head down. And again, like I mentioned, they were both head down from then on. I was again working up into 38 weeks pregnant. I didn't mention that I'm shocked that I haven't mentioned her yet, but I found the most wonderful provider. She was my OB through the whole pregnancy. I really wanted to kind of meet all of the attendings, but it just happened that I was scheduled with her every visit, and we just really formed a really precious rapport. And she really instilled a lot of confidence in me, while also telling me all of the things that could go well and all the things that could go differently for twin birth. And I really trusted her. And I just can't say enough about how my pregnancy would have been so different if I was not cared for by this OB. And she knew all of my wishes. I remember meeting her the first time. I said, I really want a home birth in the hospital with my twins. And she looked at me like I was crazy, I'm sure. But she kind of entertained it every single visit. And I don't think that my birth would have been the same had she not cared for me the way that she did. And so I just cannot understate her importance and her role. In addition to the other people involved in my birth team, my 2 doulas, they also were just so affirmative. And I knew that I needed to seek the guidance of a doula. In this case, I had 2 doulas. They kind of alternated, and because I was having my babies they were due in July, there was a lot of holidays and summer going on. So they said, if one of us can't be there, the other is going to be there for you. And they held me just like my OB did. And we just created this wonderful birth team. And I felt so empowered, even though birthing in the hospital was somewhat anxiety inducing for me. I felt like I could do this and it was going to work out and be great. And at the end of the day, we kind of worked out this, not birth plan, but my birth preferences were to have an epidural placed, the catheter just placed, but the medicine held in the event that I needed to have an epidural for a cesarean section. But we were really planning on having a vaginal birth for both girls. They were head down, like I said, the whole time. And I just want to say that my OB, every single visit said, we're planning for a vaginal birth. This is going to be great. And I just thought that was so affirmative. I hear so many birth stories where women say, I found out I was pregnant with twins and my OB wanted to schedule my C-section. And she really was very proactive about sharing evidence that, twin births can look just like singleton births and they can go just as routinely and safely. They are definitely treated differently, but, they come out of the same place and it's just doubled over sometimes. And so she really empowered me with that. Moving into their birth story, it's quite quick.
Yay. Okay, let's hear it.
Compared to my daughter, it was week 38. I think I was 38 and 4, July 2nd. I had a visit with another OB who he was an OB that I met a few times during my pregnancy, but my other OB was primarily the one that I saw during my visits. But I walked into that appointment and I said, I am due on July 14th, and I know that you all are going to start talking about induction around 39 weeks, and I would like to avoid that. So can you please sweep my membranes today? And I had done enough research over the course of the last 3+ years, knowing that a few membrane sweeps to kind of get things moving was, in a second-time mom, could really encourage labor to get going. And so he said, sure, let's do that. He checked me and I was about 3 centimeters, 10% effaced, which was encouraging to me. And also it's just kind of like, well, I'm a second-time mom. There's 2 babies bearing weight down on this thing. So we'll just kind of wait and see what happens. So I had the membrane sweep and it really sent me into prodromal labor. I started cramping immediately. I started having bloody show. Long story short, the next day I vomited that morning and I was really crampy. My contractions were about 6 minutes apart. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm really handling this active labor really well. I vomited. Like, I know that maybe I'm in transition. I just knew too much that I was like, wow, this is happening. So I texted my OB and she's like, well, I'm not here today. But why don't you just go into triage and see how things are going? So, we have our hospital bags packed. My doulas are ready to come to the hospital. The car ride it felt like I was just like riding up a mountain road and it was miserable. But I was talking. And so in hindsight, I knew that I really wasn't in active labor. All that to say, get to triage. They say, you're maybe 5 centimeters, 90% effaced. So your body's been doing a lot of work, but you're probably not going to have your babies today. So they were really wonderful in recognizing that I really wanted to labor at home as long as possible. And they counseled with one of the OBs and they said, why don't you just go home? You are close and just go home and get some rest, keep laboring and, tell us when you're more ready to have these babies. So July 4th rolls around and I am so defeated. I'm feeling feverish. I'd lost my mucus plug maybe like a week prior. So I kind of had that in my head that, that things are ramping up. I'm ready to have these babies, but that wasn't the case. July 4th rolls around. I'm having a lot of bloody show. My contractions are still, 5-6 minutes apart, but maybe around noonish, I just had frank red blood that was starting to show. And I texted my OB and she's like, we're really busy today, but that's a no-go. Please come in. We'll check you out. We're going to get you situated. And at that point, I knew that an induction, I term it a gentle induction, might be what the doctor ordered and kind of helped me get out of this prodromal labor land that was really putting me it just put me out of my misery. And I was acknowledging the fact that I had done a lot of work already and my doctor was going to take care of me. I felt, so cared for by her. So it ended up that the bleeding was just more bloody show and things were going well. We ended up being admitted for an induction. We started Pitocin at around 4:30. My doula said, don't let them start Pitocin without me being there. One of my doulas, not both of them, Holly, my doula, was able to be there, and I'm so grateful for her. She just was so wonderful, and she was there for me every step of the way, including when the Pitocin started. About an hour later, I was being cared for also by a nurse who was in midwifery school. Her name was Shelby, and she was so wonderful. That also felt like a wink from the universe that, you're in the hospital, but you're being cared for by the best people for you. The Pitocin started at 4:30, like I said, and my OB came in to check me after about an hour when they wanted to increase the Pitocin, and she said, hey, baby A is engaged. Do you mind if we break your water and see if that sends you into a little bit more intense labor? And I said, will it hurt? And I, at this point, had no pain medication. I didn't have an epidural in place. I was just kind of riding the waves, and I said, okay, felt like I had peed on myself, and I had an intense urge to go to the bathroom. So I walked to the bathroom from my bed. I have a few really intense contractions that definitely had not felt before on the toilet, and my doula was like, lean into this. This is great. Just let it happen. Surrender to it. And I really was. And I said, okay, I think I'm ready to just kind of get back in bed or just kind of stand on the side of the bed, and end up requesting my peanut ball and my cub that I used the last time. And I felt really most comfortable putting my arms over the cub and laboring that way. Around, 5:30ish, I FaceTimed my sister, who at the time was on a rotation in the ED, and she's like, I'm sewing up a shark bite right now, but I can call you back in a second. And we FaceTime, and at the very almost end of the FaceTime, I have this insane contraction. I stop vocalizing, and I say, I think I have to go when the contraction subsides. And I look at my doula and I say, I'm feeling pushy. And my doula, I feel, looks at my nurse, and my nurse looks at my husband. My husband is giving me really great counter pressure at this point on my sacrum and alternating with Holly, my doula. And the nurse messages my OB, and she comes in and checks me, and she's like, all right, Meghan, you're about to have this baby. She is right there, and we have to go to the OR. And I think a lot of people on the podcast have explained that a lot of hospitals, most hospitals, require birth in an OR, which I had planned for. I knew I couldn't control that, and so I had planned for that. She kind of came to the head of the bed and whispered to me, Meghan, it's go time. We don't have time to place an epidural. You know everything that can go right, and you know everything that might go a little bit differently, and I'm going to be here for you. She said something to that effect, and I could just cry reflecting on that, because wow, what a hype woman. And secretly, I'm just like smiling. I'm in labor land. I'm having these wildly intense contractions, but I'm just smiling. I'm like, I cannot believe this is happening. I'm going to birth these twins without anything, and that's what I had wanted. It felt so redemptive in the moment. Because we were going to the OR, my husband and doula were thrown scrubs, and they had to put cap and scrubs on, and they're basically like putting on their booties, like running down the hallway. My doula hops on the bed. It looked like a bull riding contest, I'm sure. Like, she was giving me counter pressure, like surfing on this bed, rushing from the L&D room to the OR. And at that point, I was crowning, and I felt the ring of fire, and I was vocalizing loudly. So I know the entire L&D unit moving into the OR heard the woman having natural twin birth. And we moved into the OR. I opened my eyes just to kind of take inventory of this really sterile room. And the first person I see is a gentleman I'd worked with clinically years ago. And I thought, well, I guess that's the way this is going to go. And he's going to see everything, but he's seen it all before. I get positioned still in my L&D bed onto the OR table. Actually, no, I was still in the L&D bed, and I get off of the cub ball at the request of my OB. She's like, why don't you lay on your side? Does that feel good to you? And as soon as we did that, Zoe came riding on through at 6:01. So I was pushing for not even 20 minutes until Zoe arrived. And it was beautiful. It was not chaotic at all. Everyone talks about with twins, there's so many people in the room, but I didn't notice anyone except the people who were there, and just the people who were there being that my husband, my doula, my OB, and just a few a few nurses that were there, but not making themselves a huge presence. And one of the nurses brings Zoe up to me, and I remember saying, she looks just like me, like when I was a baby. And it was just such a cool moment.
Aww.
And I got to watch Bill cut the cord, and I got to see and feel, she was so warm, and I got to feel the vernix on her. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is just so neat. I just birthed my first twin at 38 weeks and 6 days. And it was just such a cool feeling. So after Zoe came, the energy in the room was just like very joy-filled, and didn't feel like I had another baby left to have. But we ended up moving from the L&D bed to the OR table, which I wasn't really excited about. But my OB and I talked, and she said, I think we could get baby B engaged if we break your water. Is that all right? And I said, yes, let's do that. So my contractions had almost near dissipated, and I still was on the lowest dose of Pitocin, and I just kind of felt things stagnating. And I remember still feeling the contractions, but just a little less intensely. And I was on my back, and she was letting me kind of change positions, but I just felt like there was a halt. And I hear my OB say, go to 6. And no one had any context, but I knew exactly what she meant. And I yelled at the anesthesiologist, and I was like, put the Pitocin at 6. I need to have these contractions closer together. Can you help me out? And everyone started laughing. And it was just kind of the levity that we needed in the moment, because I just felt like things weren't happening. And it was an hour and a half that I was laboring. And we ended up deciding that everything was safe. It was just taking a little bit longer for Millie girl to get through. And we ended up going from the OR back to my L&D room. And I threw all of my breath work out the window for maybe the next 10 minutes. And I purple pushed. And I think I probably pushed for a whole minute, taking little sips of air. Through a contraction, I really rode that contraction, and I felt her lock into my pelvis, and a few more pushes, and she came out, and it was so wonderful. And they weren't able to bring her up as high because she had a shorter cord. One of the anatomy scan had talked about how twin A, Zoe, had a marginal cord insertion, but that ended up not being a concern at all. She had actually a longer cord than Millie. And they were able to hand both of the babies off to my husband, who held them. Zoe was our chill girl, and she was crying intermittently to let us know she was there, but not screaming. And she had waited a whole hour and a half to eat. And I was able to latch Zoe, and Millie was held and being taken care of by the nurses. And it was time for my placenta to be delivered. And during my first birth, it came out pretty routinely. She kind of gave it light tethering of it to help kind of let it come out. And I actually, in my first birth, tore. It was a grade 1 tear, and I had no tearing for this birth, which felt incredible to hear her say, everything looks great, just a little swollen. And how do you feel? And that was just really awesome. But the placenta this time had adhered to my uterine wall. And so it was 30 minutes of my OB helping facilitate the placenta. And she said, and it was probably way more intense than the waves I felt with contractions and pushing for both of the girls. It was kind of a PTSD moment of the Foley balloon insertion, with her hand kind of helping guide the placenta out. And so 30 minutes goes by, and she offered me a little bit of IV morphine, which I was apprehensive about, but I ended up saying yes to, and it didn't really take any of the pain or pressure edge off. But I'm so thankful to say that after about 30 minutes of a lot of hard work and just pure exhaustion at that point, we were able to get the placenta out. She had a resident come in and look at my uterus on ultrasound to make sure nothing was adhered or retained. And that was such a blessing. And then my girls both latched, and we had a really great, very early postpartum golden hour with my doula and my husband. And we went to our mother baby room, and were also discharged within 24 hours. I definitely asked for lactation this time around. I had been working with a lactation consultant prenatally who was a double twin mom, and I'll reference her in the show notes because she was so wonderful at helping me figure out positions and know how to hold 2 babies and prep for that. Millie had a little bit tighter of a mouth with no oral tethers, so I had a lot of nipple damage that kind of put me into a painful spiral for 2 weeks, but we kind of worked everything out. I was able to tandem feed them from the get-go. And the Twinsy pillow is my best friend still to this day, 7 months later. And the twins are born July 4th, which was a really cool day to be born. And my postpartum recovery was so much better having a natural vaginal birth with no tearing. And it was such a redemptive experience with, everything that had gone wrong in my first pregnancy, or unexpectedly, I should say. My second pregnancy made up for it. And I have 3 healthy girls, and we are just having a really hard time some days, but a really joy-filled time as well. So I'm so grateful to you and this community to be able to share everything.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we got it all in. I know
I'm sorry.
Had it all written out, and I just let you go because you had a lot to get in there. But so send me any resources that you want to link to. I know you already mentioned a few, and we'll put them on the show notes. And then where's the best place for people to connect with you? I
am admittedly addicted to Instagram and the resources that we can access on social media. You can find me there. I'm private. So if any twin moms or any, expecting mothers or not mothers, anyone wants to reach me, I'm at MENELLOHZ. Manellos is how you pronounce it. I can list it in the show notes. Please send me a message. I love sharing my birth story. I love sharing breastfeeding advice, and any and all the above.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Meghan.
Thank you, Bryn.
Okay, now I'm going to chat with Kate about Aeroflow breast pumps and getting your breast pump for free through insurance, as well as their free lactation classes that you can sign up for and your insurance will cover. Let's chat with Kate. Hi, Kate. Thanks so much for coming on the Birth Hour today to chat with me about Aeroflow breast pumps.
Yay. Hi, Bryn. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, you reached out via Instagram about Aeroflow and your experience with them, and I was so excited to talk with you. So will you just tell people a little bit about, how you found Aeroflow and the process you went through for using their services?
Yeah, for sure. So it was actually through the Birth Hour, through your podcast, that I heard about Aeroflow and decided to just fill out the form. It's like a very simple form you fill out online, where you put in your insurance information, and then Aeroflow does the rest.
Yeah.
And so they got me a free breast pump. I think it was the Spectra is the one that was the one I chose through insurance. But Aeroflow will actually show you all of the different pumps available to you, how much they cost through insurance. Some of them you do have to pay a little bit, and then they show you the ones that are fully covered. And so I decided, I chose the Spectra, and they sent it to me. And then I think I got an email or a text that said hey, thanks for, using Aeroflow. You should also sign up for our lactation classes. And, you get tons of those sort of promotional emails.
Right.
And I didn't think much of it. I was okay, whatever, I'll take a look at this later. And then I started looking more into it, and I was oh, actually these classes look pretty cool. They were fully virtual and they were covered by insurance. And so I decided, I was what the heck, let's do it. And I signed up for, I think, 4 different classes. I only made it to 2 of them, but the 2 that I went to were Lactation 101 and Pumping 101. And they're just such great classes. I was so surprised by the quality of the classes. They're taught by, is it
IBCLC?
Yeah. And they just gave a ton of good information about starting breastfeeding off right. And so it also would be helpful too for people who are newly breastfeeding, just kind of work through some potential breastfeeding issues like latching or positioning. But yeah, I contribute a lot to my success. So my daughter is 4 weeks old now, and we had a pretty solid start to breastfeeding. I've been exclusively breastfeeding, and I contribute a lot of it to having that support from the class. The way the classes run too they're live.
Oh, cool. That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, they're virtual, so you can join via Zoom.
Yeah,
but they're live, and so the instructor is there teaching the course. They're also really just super good teachers. I felt the way they presented information was really good. They had tons of visuals and videos, live demonstrations where they have a baby doll, and they were showing different positions and ways to get baby to latch. And so they are live though, so you can ask questions. And so you're able to ask questions in the chat. You can, excuse me, unmute and like have a conversation back and forth. So very like helpful for like if you have specific questions too about lactation.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Especially like you said, like even after baby arrives, to be able to like look at the positioning of the baby doll and like position your own baby on screen and be like, like this, or that's great.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And like the pumping 101, like this is my first baby and I had never pumped before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have the same pump that they were using in the demo, the Spectra.
Oh, nice.
And so it was really cool I kind of like walked along with, like did the demo along with them on the same pump, which was just really helpful, having never used a breast pump before. Like,
yeah.
They look kind of scary, at least to me. They looked pretty scary. And so it was nice to like be able to sort of walk through with the instructor and get a demo.
So when you were signing up for it, was the scheduling, were there like several a month or like lots of options? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. It was pretty convenient. They gave a few times a month, I want to say, and like I want to say they were like different hours too.
Okay.
But it was like scheduling was really, really easy. I remember like, cause they have, all your information, like they have insurance information already. And so they do all the back end work of clearing this with insurance, because they're classes run by professionals and they do cost money, but insurance covers the cost. And so they would like take attendance at the beginning of the Zoom call. And then they did like all that back end work to make sure it was covered by insurance. And so I didn't have to do anything except like put in my name and email to sign up. So yeah, like really easy.
Awesome.
And again, like kind of going into it, I was like, I'll give this a try, kind of see what it's like. And then I was just like captivated. I remember after the call, getting off particularly the Lactation 101 call, and just like being like to my partner, like, oh my gosh, you've got to hear like what I learned.
Oh, cool.
Like he was like, wow, you see, like, you're like an expert now in lactation. I was like, I feel like it. Like, I feel like I'm like, have a lot of good, solid information. So yeah, like super pleasantly surprised by how informative and just helpful the classes were.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that I had posted about Aeroflow on Instagram and you responded like, their classes are amazing. And so I knew you were passionate about it enough to like respond to an Instagram story.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. And I knew they had lactation education, but I wasn't fully aware of the format and everything, and the fact that they're live. I mean, that's like having your own virtual lactation consultant. So that's amazing. And
I had taken like a childbirth ed class, paid for, like it was a community one that I paid for here. And I live in Minneapolis. And it was like, one of the weeks we went over lactation, and it was like similar information, but like free, like I was like, and it also like it was kind of went more in depth, because the Aeroflow class was specifically a lactation class, like the Lactation 101 class, what I'm thinking of. So yeah, it was just like very quality, like good information.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to add this definitely to our resources on the website and our childbirth course, because we go over a lot of that stuff as well. But the live aspect, I think, is just so great, even if it's a refresher for, second or third time, or you already took a class, just something to kind of get a refresher and ask questions and things like that. So.
And there are some other classes, like the other ones I signed up for but didn't end up making. There was like one on like maternity leave, like, and your kind of like, I think, lactation stuff around leave and like going back to work.
Right.
But yeah, they were all covered through insurance. So.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to have to reach out to Aeroflow and audit these classes so that I can talk about it more as well. But thank you so much for shining a spotlight on it.
Yeah, for sure. Highly recommend. So when you get that email or that text that says, hey, do you want to also sign up for the classes? You should do it. Because like I said, I was kind of like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, like promotional email for Airflow, but.
Right. And we're all paying so much for insurance, like we might as well get as much out of it as we can.
Totally. It was well worth it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Kate.
Yeah, of course, Bryn. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you so much again to Meghan for sharing her story with us, and to Aeroflow for sponsoring this episode. Remember to head over to aeroflowbreastpumps.com/birthhour to get started with getting your pump and other things like their classes and everything through your insurance. And if you want more information from today's episode, head over to thebirthhour.com and just search for Meghan's name in the search bar to find her show notes page. Of course, we'd also love to have you join us in our online childbirth course or on Patreon, and those things will be linked both in the app where you're listening to this episode as well as on the website, thebirthhour.com.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.